Hi! Today we're going to learn how to draw a pyramid. The first thing that we're going to start with is the ground line as always. So use your ruler to draw a very light straight line across your page with your lightest pencil. We're going to end up erasing this, so do it nice and light. And this is just an imaginary line where the shape touches the ground. Next, we're going to decide how tall we want our pyramid to be. And however tall that is, we're going to draw a straight line down to the ground line and then just going a little bit below the ground line. From there, I'm going to put 2 dots along the ground line to show how wide I want my pyramid to be. And the reason I put the dots there is just to help me make sure that my sides are even. So it's helping me draw an even isosceles triangle. And again, all these lines I'm drawing really lightly. From there, I'm going to connect this line here to each of the side lines. And now you'll see that this shape is becoming a pyramid with my front edge of the pyramid and my 2 sides of the pyramid. Next, I need to draw in the imaginary back ends of the base of the pyramid. So I'm putting in a little dot about the same distance from my ground line as the front of the edge of my pyramid is. And from there, I'm just drawing little lines showing where the imaginary back sides of the base of the pyramid would be. Now, the only reason I'm drawing these in is to help me figure out where my cast shadow would go, and that's what I'm going to put in next. So I'm going to pretend that my light source is up here on the left-hand side of my pyramid. So here's my little sun as my light source. And to figure out where the tip of my cast shadow is going to be, I'm going to draw a line from my light source through the tip of my pyramid to wherever it touches my ground line. And then this point right here is going to be the tip of my cast shadow. Now, to me, that cast shadow looks a little bit short. And if that's the case, or if your cast shadow got way too long and doesn't fit on the page, you can just adjust where your light source is. So in order to make my cast shadow just a little bit longer, I'm going to move my light source a little bit to the left. And then you'll see that even just that little change makes my cast shadow a lot longer. So line through the tip of the pyramid to where it touches the ground line, and that shows where the farthest edge of my cast shadow is going to go. From there, to draw in the sides of my cast shadow, I'm going to draw a line from the front edge of the base of my pyramid and the back corner of the base of my pyramid, and I'm going to make those lines touch this tip of the shadow on the ground line. And that's going to create the sides of my shadow. So now I've got in the shape of my cast shadow and the shape of my pyramid, and I'm ready to go back and erase all my extra lines so that I'm ready to start shading. So I'm going to erase the imaginary back edges of the base that I drew in, and whatever part of the cast shadow would fall behind the pyramid, because my pyramid's not see-through, it's a solid form, so I wouldn't be able to see this back edge of the cast shadow. I'm also erasing my ground line, because that was just an imaginary line to help me figure out where everything else went. And I'm going to erase the line from the light source that I used to draw my cast shadow, because again, that was just helping me figure out where the tip of my shadow would fall. Once I've done all this erasing, I'll probably need to go back and redraw in some of the lines that I did want to keep, because probably some of them got a little bit erased. And I'm still drawing these really nice and light. Your line should be even lighter than my lines, because I'm drawing them dark enough so that you can really see them, but yours should be so light you can barely see them, like ghost lines. So again, my cast shadow, that back edge of the cast shadow, is ending where it touches the form, because I can't see this part of the cast shadow because that's going behind my form. Finally, even if you do your lines lightly, you may want to go back in and just lighten them up a tiny bit more to make sure that they're really ghost lines. Because remember, when we're going in and we're shading our form and our cast shadow, we never want anything to have dark outlines, because in real life, forms and shadows do not have dark outlines. So if we invent those in our drawing, it's going to make it look a lot less realistic. So now I'm all cleaned up, I'm ready to start shading. The first thing that I usually like to shade is the cast shadow. So when I'm shading in the cast shadow, I'm using my darkest pencil, which right now is a 6B. But I'm not pressing very hard. I'm starting out at the base of the shadow, and that's going to be my darkest part. And then the center of the shadow is also the darkest part. So it's kind of starting out looking like that. As I move to the sides of the shadow and to the tip of the shadow, I'm pressing lighter and lighter so that I have a gradual fade to the edge of my shadows, which get really light and which do not have a dark outline. And that's because in real life, all the outside light filters into your shadow a little bit. So as the shadow moves away from the form, it has more outside indirect light filtering in, and that makes the shadow get lighter. Here's what this looks like just a little bit closer up. Next, I'm going to shade in this side of my pyramid, and that's going to be the side that's more in shadow because the light is coming from this direction and hitting this other side of the pyramid. So I'm going to draw this one, I'm going to shade it in with some shadow. I'm going to start at the tip of the pyramid, and again I'm using tiny little pencil motions. I'm not shading very dark. Right now I'm using my middle pencil, which right now is my 2B. Using tiny little pencil motions, and it should just pretty much be the same value all the way down to the bottom of my pyramid. Now the exception is, once I get to the very bottom, I'm going to have to lighten up the shadow just the tiniest bit, and that's because I need to include the reflected light, which means the indirect light that's bouncing off the ground and hitting the pyramid. Now that's not going to be a highlight, it's definitely not going to be pure white, because this is still in shadow, it still doesn't have any direct light hitting it. It's just a little tiny bit of indirect light filtering into the shadow, making it less dark. So right down here, I'm going to gradually start pressing just a tiny bit lighter. And this shift in value should be so subtle that you barely notice it. And then if I need to, I can go back. Mine might almost be a little too subtle, so I could go back and just darken up a few little parts of this. But again, I'm doing super careful shading, using tiny pencil motions so that I don't see any visible pencil marks from my shading. So now I've gotten in my shadow side of my pyramid. The final thing I need to do is just add some very subtle shading to my highlighted side. So if I haven't already, I'm going to make sure that these two outlines of my pyramid are even lighter. The lightest they can be that you can still see them, just barely. And that's because on this highlighted side, I'm going to have such subtle shading that it's going to be really tricky to make those outlines disappear. So I'm going in now with my lightest pencil, which for me is a 2H. And I'm just doing very subtle shading, starting from the tip of my pyramid, working my way down. And along that whole side of the pyramid, I'm just shading super lightly so that you can just barely see that I've shaded it all. And that's just to be able to tell where my pyramid stops and where my white background starts. So the most subtle shading you could possibly do. And now I'm all done, and I have my 3D pyramid.